What can you tell us about the Nativity, the real Nativity? Do we know anything about
Luke's
it?
version? Are you talking about Luke's version?
Well, Luke's version is very poetic and beautiful, but what was reality? What do we know about the Nativity?
Nothing.
That's what I thought.
Well, we know that he had to be born because Mary says so. Mary tells the story, but it's been embellished, and it's very beautiful, and it's very symbolic. And it has a lot to do with symbols and numbers, which people aren't aware of, which is a whole other study, symbolic numbers and numerology. But Luke tells it beautifully. But if you go to the original scripture, the Gospel of Mark, which was first, 67, there's no nativity. It starts right out with Jesus coming out of the desert and John the Baptist. So we know that when you, as the years go by, you add, you don't subtract. People add to a story, you don't take away. You aren't going to take away any of the original, they're just going to keep adding. And until like the 4th century where it was closed, I said, now you can add. That's why we know things were added.
Well, Luke's poetic version of the Nativity is just so beautiful.
Yes.
The writing is incredible. So, was he a philosopher, or tell me about Luke?
Luke was a physician.
Physician.
Yes. And he traveled with Paul, so he had first-hand knowledge. So we know that actually he's the most historical of all the books. You start with the 3rd chapter, you start to get the history. And he traveled with Paul, and so he had more knowledge of it than anyone. Plus, we know he's a physician because of some of the terminology. He uses terminology like he knows the words for different illnesses and things that people were treating at that time, and we just know he was a physician.
Is the term pagan, does that refer to one religion, or is that a generic term?
It's generic, because paganism merely means worshiping idols. That's all it means. And so it could be a rock. Pagan could worship a rock, he could worship plants, he could worship the woods, he could worship a river. It just means worshiping idols.
So how did the Canaanites, who were goddess worshippers, become the Palestinians who worship completely different? How did that?
Islamic. Arabs are Islamic.
Yeah. So how was that?
Well, that was all turned around by Muhammad in about 622 AD, actually, when he started.
Got a jug again.
But Muhammad was very influential in bringing his people together. That's what made them a unit. Before that, they were just tribal chieftains living all over the place, moving with their tents, and it was just kill or be killed, and there was no unity. But he's the one that drew his people together as a nation, not a nation as much as a people, a culture, the Arab culture. And almost all Arabs are Islamic.
How do you feel about the Islam faith?
Now, I'm very open to all religions because I think every one of them has some valid point. But Islam is so out for world domination that it scares me. I think that the leaders in charge are using Islam as a tool to get the people to do what they want them to do. And you can talk to some who really practice their faith, who are very much against terrorism, against the war, against a lot of these things that are going on. So I think it's the leaders who are causing all the trouble. But Muhammad's original purpose certainly was not to do that. He talks about jihad, the holy war, and of course a lot of those took place after Islam became dominant in that area. Then there were a lot of holy wars where they tried to, what do they call themselves now? Not Saracens. But they would try to recapture Jerusalem and some of the holy cities because their cities are also holy in that same area. Not Jerusalem so much as some of the others, like Mecca and places where Islam started. Those are all holy places. They have shrines in all those places.
Mhm.
So that's one reason the Palestinians want to get that area for
Mhm.
their own religion. And it's a shame when you stop and think about the three world religions arguing like that, because in Jerusalem you have Christianity, Islam, and Hebrew all fighting for the same territory. And it's in the name of religion.
Right. It sounds as if the political agenda of the Islamic faith is a lot like the early Crusades of the Christians.
Yes, very much so. The whole idea of killing people for, just to gain land, that's what the Hebrews did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very much so.
Mm. Okay, a couple more questions. Can you give some kind of a comparison of the Hebrew, I don't want to say holidays, but their sacred celebrations, and compare them to some of the sacred Christian celebrations? Which ones are pretty synonymous? For instance, the Yom Kippur in Hebrew is a Day of Atonement. Is there a similar one in the Christian faith? How would that compare?
That would be Lent.
Right.
Yes, Ash Wednesday, the whole period of Lent is supposed to be atonement and getting in tune with yourself. Usually people think of it in terms of giving up something, but that shouldn't be the total objective, just to give up, oh, I'm going to give up chocolate for Lent, or I'm going to give up this or that. When in fact it's more getting in tune with your inner self and purging yourself of some of the bad habits and some of the things you do that you know are wrong. But Hanukkah is dedication, and that's after, it starts with Esther and Purim, which is the day when the oil was burned. I hate to get into Esther because most scholars believe she never existed and that it's fictional. So I'm not sure that that's...
But it's still a valid story in terms of what it teaches.
Yeah, and the very fact that it's the only book that's not found in the Dead Sea Scrolls adds credence to what they're saying, that it was written long afterward. They said they've gone into the Persian files to look up the book of Esther, and there's never been any such person. She was supposed to be a queen. Wouldn't that be in their annals somewhere if she were a queen? Nothing. They can't find anything. So I'm tempted to believe it's fictional.
Okay.
Along with Jonah. I have problems with those. And those, don't get me wrong, but those are things I can't teach at my church.
Yeah, I understand.
Then I'm not ready for them.
And you were going to say Hanukkah was similar to something?
Oh, Hanukkah is the dedication, rededication of the temple. And actually, they're going to be coming out with a movie about the Maccabees very soon. I heard it was in production right now. And that's exciting because that's your intertestamental period during that 400 years. So we're talking now about 165, the same time the book of Daniel was written. And remember I told you how Epiphanes desecrated the temple and burned pork in there and put a statue and everything. So the cleansing of the temple, after he left, they all went in and cleansed the temple and rededicated, and their rededication is called Hanukkah.
Okay.
And that's because the oil lamp burned 8 days instead of 7. It's only supposed to burn 7-branch candlestick. The menorah is supposed to burn 7 days, and it burned 8 days, so they thought that was miraculous.
Yeah.
So that's the rededication.
Is there a similar celebration in Christian faith?
I don't think so. I can't think of any in particular, unless a new church is built and they dedicate it.
Okay. Any other similar celebrations between the Hebrew faith and the Christian?
Well, actually, we've taken over their Passover because we've taken it over as
Easter.
As Easter, yeah. It's part of our 40-day stretch. We've co-opted a lot of holidays from other people. Christmas was originally a pagan holiday, which we took over. Easter was associated with Passover. And of course, everybody had New Year's, but it was at different times of the year.
Right, I think the pagan New Year was in the spring. which would make a lot of sense,
Yeah.
rather than right in the middle of winter.
Well, we have something, I could say our Thanksgiving is similar to the Feast of Weeks or the Harvest. They did have a harvest festival. It's called the Feast of Weeks. And, or the tabernacle, where they build booths. And everybody comes to Jerusalem, you build a booth anywhere around the city. And you stay there for 8 or 10 days, however long the thing lasts. And everybody brings their harvest in and sells it on the street, like an open market. Very much like Thanksgiving and the Pilgrims, because that's in September, October area.
Well, yeah, the
Whenever their harvest is, I'm not sure the exact months, but that's similar to our Thanksgiving.